We are conditioned to believe human life begins with a first breath, but the global economy operates on an entirely different timeline. The moment the ink strikes your birth certificate, the hospital printer spits out a standardized product. A 9-digit Social Security card is stamped. Your credit score begins its algorithmic gestation. You look at the sleeping infant in the crib, but the financial system sees a glowing barcode, a highly liquid asset freshly minted for the market. The paradox of your existence is that right now, as you watch this screen, you are split in two. There is the biological organism sitting in a chair, and then there is your paper avatar. That corporate clone is currently being traded, scored, leveraged, and shorted by high-frequency algorithms you cannot see and certainly do not control. If you do not understand the operating system of the Uniform Commercial Code, you are defenseless against a machine treating your pulse as liquid collateral. You were programmed to view the law as a moral framework, a shield for the innocent. That is the grandest illusion of the modern era. The law is simply a data structure, the source code of society. Today, we are going to decompile that code. By acquiring these new intellectual optics, you will understand exactly how you were monetized. More importantly, you will learn how the imminent transition to cryptographic self-sovereignty is your only chance to reclaim ownership of your digital self. A macro lens reveals a steel fountain pen tearing across a crisp legal document, the dark blue ink bleeding deeply into the woven paper fibers. The camera pulls back violently, exposing an infinitely towering sub-basement archive of state files. To the legal archivist surrounded by humming microfiche servers, this is not a repository of human histories. It is a cynical database of standardized commercial forms. Every drawer holds thousands of lives reduced to easily tradable contract clauses. The archivist flips through a dossier, staring at the capitalized names. In this cavernous room, a devastating misconception becomes undeniable. Within global commerce, a person is not inherently a biological human being. A legal person is merely a fiction, an abstract container engineered to hold corporate rights and commercial duties. The system only cares if your container can process debt. You might assume this architecture was born from a malicious conspiracy devised by shadowy bankers in a smoke-filled room. The truth is far more pragmatic and perhaps more chilling. This abstraction is a sheer efficiency protocol adapted directly from the legal mechanisms of the ancient Roman Empire. The state needed a way to allow corporate entities and tax obligations to survive continuously, completely bypassing the inconvenient mortality of a 70-year human lifespan. The document you framed in your nursery is not what you think it is. To the archivist, holding it under the harsh fluorescent light, a birth certificate is functionally a receipt of origin. It officially registers the creation of a blind trust entity. This piece of paper gives the state the necessary interface to plug your biological existence directly into the global financial markets. You were born, yes, but your capitalized name was incorporated as a node in an algorithmic network. Watch the ink of your capitalized name dissolve off the page, shattering into millions of lines of binary code. It streams upward, forming a massive, invisible matrix connecting central banks, judicial courts, and offshore server farms across the globe. This is the true scale of the illusion. The system requires standardization to process billions of transactions per second. A living, breathing human is far too unpredictable, too emotional, and too legally messy for this high-speed grid. Look at the statistics, because the statistics expose the lie. Over 90% of all the interactions you have with the state, or with any multinational corporation, are entirely devoid of biological reality. When you sign a mortgage, pay a tax bill, or accept a terms of service agreement, it is not a human talking to a human. It is a purely contract-to-contract handshake. Your physical body is merely the biological battery powering the legal ghost executing the transaction. High school civics taught you that you are a sovereign citizen endowed with unalienable rights. But the structural reality of the Uniform Commercial Code dictates otherwise. You are effectively trespassing in a commercial jurisdiction where your primary function is to act as a guarantor for your corporate counterpart. The archivist knows this truth intimately. They see the exhaustion in the system, the absolute absurdity of cramming complex human consciousness into standardized paper clones. The separation between flesh and paper is absolute. Your biology belongs to nature, but your identity belongs to the registry. The law does not see the sweat on your brow or the intent in your heart. It only parses the metadata attached to your specific legal container. When that container is leveraged, traded, or sued, you feel the physical consequences, even though the entity being manipulated is nothing more than a carefully constructed linguistic phantom hovering over the market. We are standing on the precipice of a massive sociological unmasking. For over 70 years, this dual identity has been the secret engine of global capitalism, allowing an unprecedented scaling of wealth by treating every citizen as a standardized corporate variable. But this system is aging, its paper foundations crumbling under the weight of its own recursive logic. The question is no longer how this matrix was built, but whether you even realize you are permanently plugged into it. The ultimate paradox is sitting right in your wallet. You think you own your name, but legally, your name written in all capital letters on your driver's license and bank statements is an entirely different entity. It is a ghost ship navigating an unforgiving ocean of commerce, and you are merely the biological engine room keeping it afloat. How exactly did this corporate doppelganger take control of your destiny? And, more importantly, how do you mathematically destroy it? To dismantle this mathematical leviathan, we must first isolate the exact moment your paper ghost was drafted into a unified algorithmic army. You are accustomed to seeing the law as a slow, archaic mechanism of gavels and dusty courtrooms. But tomorrow's reality requires you to look back and recognize the law for what it truly is: the original source code of modern capitalism, compiled long before the first silicon microchip was ever etched. Here is the paradox that breaks your high school civics curriculum. How do you trade 1 billion tons of wheat across 50 violently different sovereign jurisdictions without moving a single physical grain? You do not load it onto trains. You do not negotiate with 50 different local sheriffs. You invent a universal translation layer. You abstract the biological and physical reality into a pure, frictionless data stream. Step into a chaotic, smoke-filled 1950s drafting room. The air is thick with tobacco and intellectual hubris. Legal scholars are drowning in mountains of contradictory state statutes. The Second World War has ended, and the American industrial machine is ready to dominate the globe. But this unprecedented economic boom is choking to death on legal friction. Before 1952, interstate commerce in the United States was a gridlocked nightmare. A contract written in New York was functionally useless in Nevada. Moving capital across state lines required navigating a labyrinth of local prejudices and archaic traditions. The system was fragmented, slow, and biologically bound. It was a mechanical calculator trying to run a global empire, and it was on the verge of catastrophic failure. This is where your official narrative is a myth. You were programmed to believe that legal titans gathered to protect human rights or ensure moral justice. But the chief reporter in that smoke-filled room, a brilliant jurist named Karl Llewellyn, was not interested in morality. He was an architect, and his singular objective was to build a predictable, frictionless algorithm for capital. He was debugging the American economy. Llewellyn and his team did not just write the Uniform Commercial Code. They coded a new society using paper and ink. They ruthlessly stripped away the human element from commercial transactions. Justice is subjective, emotional, and slow. Mathematics is absolute. They needed a system where a massive corporation could interface with a local vendor without ever considering the biological reality of the humans involved in the trade. Watch the invisible architecture construct itself. As Llewellyn's team finalizes the text, the fragmented trade routes across America suddenly align into a high-speed, frictionless grid. The Uniform Commercial Code became the first application programming interface of capitalism. It was an invisible protocol that allowed entirely different state architectures to communicate flawlessly, exchanging colossal amounts of wealth in milliseconds. The genius of this legal exploit was its absolute abstraction. The code successfully converted the crushing complexities of physical trade into pure mathematical relationships. A cargo ship full of steel was no longer a physical object. It was a standardized legal variable. A lifetime of human labor was no longer blood and sweat. It was a predictable collateral metric. By flattening physical goods and human promises into identical data points, the draftsmen achieved the impossible. They created a synthetic reality where the paper avatar of a citizen was infinitely more useful than the citizen themselves. Your physical body is unpredictable. It gets sick, it protests, it demands rights. Your corporate proxy, defined by the Uniform Commercial Code, simply executes the contract exactly as programmed. The deployment of this software was a masterpiece of sociological engineering. By adopting the code, all 50 independent states essentially agreed to format their hard drives and run the exact same legal operating system. They surrendered their localized biological chaos for the sleek, cold efficiency of standardized commercial logic. It was a silent, bloodless coup that replaced regional sovereignty with corporate synchronization. With this universal protocol installed, the American economy instantly became the most scalable machine in human history. It bypassed the limitations of geography and human friction, accelerating capital velocity to near light speed. The gross domestic product exploded, not because humans suddenly worked harder, but because the legal architecture finally allowed wealth to multiply in a purely conceptual, mathematical vacuum. You have been living inside this mid-century legal hack your entire life, completely unaware that the environment around you is synthetic. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every user agreement is a line of code executing within Llewellyn's masterpiece. You were taught to revere the Constitution, but the Uniform Commercial Code is the actual master program, dictating the survival and movement of every asset on the board. This mathematical framework of human subjugation was breathtakingly elegant. It solved the logistics of a post-war empire by simply removing the human from the equation entirely. But creating a frictionless environment where promises can be traded infinitely introduces a terrifying new variable. Once you encode the present, the inevitable next step is to collateralize the future. And that is where the algorithm becomes a predator. Now that the universal operating system is installed, we must examine its most powerful and terrifying subroutine: the ability to collateralize the future. You were taught that slavery was abolished by constitutional amendments. That is a comforting, high school-level misconception. The system simply upgraded its methodology. To the archivist navigating these endless data nodes, watching the flashing red lights of a server farm matching credit scores, the truth is mathematically undeniable. Watch the pedestrians walking down the avenue, completely oblivious to the invisible architecture floating above their heads. If you possess the correct optics, you do not see flesh and blood. You see real-time data streams, debt obligations, algorithmic risk profiles, and active liens tracking their every movement. When exactly did you stop being a free citizen and start being a purely financial derivative? The answer lies buried within Article 9 of the Uniform Commercial Code. The official narrative tells you that a loan is merely a relationship of trust between a bank and a borrower. The statistics lie, and the reality is much colder. Article 9 governs secured transactions, acting as the fundamental legal mechanism that allows abstract, conceptual promises to be backed by actual physical or intangible assets. It is the bridge between the ghost world of corporate contracts and the very real world of your car, your house, and your physical sweat. To understand this mechanism, you must discard your intuitive understanding of ownership. In the humming silence of the data center, the archivist pulls up a digital schematic. It shows that the bank does not actually care about the physical object. They care about the security interest, the invisible mathematical tether connecting their ledger to your property. The physical asset is merely a temporary anchor for a floating financial concept. But the architects of this code did not stop at cars and houses. That would be too limiting for a truly scalable economy. Under this ruthless framework, your future labor, your biological signature, and your abstract credit capacity are officially classified as intangible property. They can be hypothecated, which means they are pledged as active collateral without ever transferring physical ownership. You keep your body, but the state holds the invisible title to your future energy. This is a brilliant, counterintuitive paradox. You believe you are walking down that street as a free agent, making independent choices about your career and your spending. But mathematically, you are a walking, breathing bond. Every time you sign a contract, you are literally generating new currency out of thin air, using the future output of your own biological battery as the underlying asset. The system does not need to chain you. It simply chains your paper avatar. To grasp the sheer scale of this exploit, we must look at a critical mutation in the financial timeline. When the global economy officially abandoned the gold standard in 1971, a massive void opened in the foundation of reality. The paper money in your pocket was suddenly backed by absolutely nothing physical. To prevent an immediate collapse, the system required a new, inexhaustible resource to serve as the ultimate backing for all fiat currency on the planet. Staring at the cascading rows of binary code, the archivist smiles with a cynical, exhausted amusement. The answer to this crisis was incredibly elegant. The new gold was you. Your human capital, your predictable compliance, and the absolute trust in these paper contracts became the new bedrock of global finance. Your biological capacity to wake up every morning, go to work, and pay taxes is the only physical asset preventing the entire economic matrix from instantly disintegrating. This brings us to the most invasive piece of paperwork ever devised by human lawyers: It is called a UCC-1 financing statement. This document is literally a flag planted deep into the soil of your legal entity. It is a beacon signaling to the global market that a specific institution legally claims a piece of your future economic output. It is the barcode stamped directly onto the forehead of your corporate clone. Whenever you buy a car on credit, start a business, or sign a major loan, one of these digital flags is quietly filed in a state registry. From the archivist's perspective, reading the endless microfiche records, the pattern is overwhelmingly obvious. You are not the beneficiary of these transactions. You are the product being packaged. The bank is simply acquiring a secured legal interest in your biological engine, trading your predicted future labor on the open market. You have been programmed to feel pride when your credit score increases. You view it as a marker of personal responsibility and societal trust. That official narrative is a carefully constructed myth. A high credit score simply means your paper avatar is a highly reliable, low-risk derivative. It means you are mathematically guaranteed to surrender your future energy exactly as the algorithms predicted. You are celebrating your efficiency as a perfectly obedient financial commodity. Look back at that busy intersection. The floating data streams are no longer just random numbers. They are a suffocating web of legal chains. Millions of invisible tethers stretching from the pedestrians, routing through the humming server farms, and terminating in the vaults of central banks. This is the application programming interface of money executing in real time. It is a brilliant orchestration where human lives are continually abstracted and digested by the global ledger. The genius of Article 9 is that it operates entirely below the threshold of human perception. You cannot feel a UCC-1 statement being filed. You do not bleed when your future labor is hypothecated and sold to a shadow bank in another hemisphere. The violence is purely mathematical, executed through elegant legal fictions and zero-friction electronic transfers. The archivist knows that the physical world is merely a shadow cast by this overwhelming, unseen commercial reality. But any system that completely divorces itself from physical reality is fundamentally unstable. We created an operating system that treats infinite collateralization as a feature, not a bug. We built an entire civilization on the assumption that the biological human will always be able to generate enough energy to satisfy the demands of the mathematical clone. We pushed the laws of physics and economics to their absolute breaking point, drunk on the illusion of endless leverage. This architecture of control is magnificent, but it harbors a fatal, unavoidable flaw. When you transform every citizen into a liquid financial derivative, you connect the survival of the global economy directly to the fragility of human endurance. The code was running perfectly, compounding wealth at an unprecedented rate, until the underlying biological assets simply could not keep up. The system was mathematically doomed to reach a threshold where reality would violently snap back. The system was mathematically doomed to reach a threshold where reality would violently snap back. The ability to collateralize anything inevitably led to the system trying to collateralize nothing. This triggered a catastrophic bug in the global financial software. I watched the Wall Street trading floor transform during the 2008 crash. It was not a normal market correction. It was a massive buffer overflow in the operating system of capitalism. Through the eyes of the panicked brokers, you see physical paper contracts flying into a digital void, flashing a violent red. They are holding their heads in despair as the physical sensation of trillions of dollars evaporating hits the room. The air itself feels heavy, sucked out of the room by a vacuum of pure negative equity. You were taught this was a housing crisis. You were programmed with a lie. What happens when the legal code runs completely out of control? The ghosts start trading themselves, and reality crashes. The architects of this system abstracted human life into data, but they forgot a fundamental law of physics. You cannot build infinite leverage on a finite biological foundation. The system became completely disconnected from the actual dirt, sweat, and concrete it was supposed to represent. The 2008 subprime mortgage crisis was functionally a recursive loop error. The financial engineers built derivatives on top of derivatives. They packaged your paper avatar's debt, sliced it into tranches, and sold those tranches to create new debt. The legal fiction completely detached from biological reality, spinning furiously in a vacuum of pure mathematical speculation. This anomaly is known as rehypothecation. It sounds like complex financial jargon, but the mechanism is brutally simple. The banks used the exact same underlying asset as collateral for multiple different loans simultaneously. If you try to sell the same physical car to 5 different people, you go to prison for fraud. But in the realm of the Uniform Commercial Code, this violation of physical physics is perfectly legal math. The algorithm simply cloned the collateral. One biological family paying a mortgage was magically supporting the balance sheets of 3 different global investment banks. This counterintuitive reality allowed the derivatives market to balloon into the hundreds of trillions of dollars. It was an inverted pyramid resting on a single, fractured point of biological human labor. The math worked perfectly, until it suddenly did not. When the math collapsed, the damage was not distributed equally. The algorithm targeted the most vulnerable biological nodes first. Between 2005 and 2009, the median net worth of Hispanic households plummeted by 66%. Black households lost 53% of their wealth. White households lost 16%. The code extracted physical wealth from specific communities to feed the dying paper avatars. This is the terrifying truth of the algorithmic bureaucracy. It does not see race or human suffering. It only executes the mathematical extraction of value. Families were evicted onto the physical street because their legal fictions failed a stress test in a server room thousands of miles away. The system demanded physical settlement from biological humans. Those biological humans were mathematically incapable of producing the trillions of dollars of labor the paper avatars had promised. You cannot bleed a stone, and you cannot force a human body to work 1,000 hours in a single day to satisfy a smart contract. When the music stopped, the discrepancy between the infinite digital promises and the finite physical reality tore a massive hole in the fabric of global civilization. The physical economy was completely paralyzed. We stood on the absolute brink of a dark age, watching the source code of capitalism eat itself alive. The illusion of the legal person was shattered, exposing the raw, fragile machinery underneath. If this scale blows your mind too, hit the like button. If you want to survive the next inevitable crash and uncover the solution to this grand mystery, subscribe and leave a comment. Do you think we ever stood a chance against this code? The governments of the world did not fix the bug. They simply printed more paper ghosts to cover it up. They bailed out the mathematical models while sacrificing the biological citizens. The architects realized that the Uniform Commercial Code was fatally flawed, but they doubled down on the illusion. They forced the surviving taxpayers to absorb the toxic, corrupted data of the failing investment banks. You were told that the system was saved, that the regulations were tightened. That is a comforting fairy tale. The core API remains exactly the same today. Your future energy is still being collateralized, traded, and leveraged by entities you will never meet. The buffer overflow of 2008 was merely a warning shot, a stress test that proved centralized legal fictions are a lethal threat to human survival. But inside this catastrophic failure, a new paradigm was quietly being born. While the old guard frantically taped the burning commercial code back together, a silent rebellion began in the shadows of the internet. The realization hit a few brilliant minds. If the legal code is fundamentally broken, we must write a new one based on unbreakable mathematical truth. The age of the centralized paper clone was about to meet its ultimate predator. The age of the centralized paper clone was about to meet its ultimate predator. You were taught that the collapse of 2008 was a tragedy of human greed. You are entirely wrong. It was a fatal syntax error in an obsolete operating system. The old application programming interface, the uniform commercial code, crashed because it relied on human trust. But exactly 3 months later, in the depths of that financial winter, an anonymous entity released a patch. Look closely at this hypermodern server room in Zug, Switzerland. The air is entirely sterilized, vibrating with the deafening roar of industrial cooling fans. Bathed in the cold blue light of light-emitting diodes, the system's architect stares at a terminal with predatory focus. They are not looking at legal precedents or banking regulations. They are watching a new kind of physics being born. They realize the old laws are completely dead. For decades, you have been trapped in a system that required a state-sanctioned intermediary to validate your existence. A judge, a banker, a bureaucrat. But to kill an invisible legal fiction, you do not need a better lawyer or a sharper politician. You need an unbreakable mathematical truth. You need a mechanism that strips the state of its absolute monopoly on human interaction. You need pure, unadulterated cryptography. In January 2009, the launch of the Bitcoin network deployed the first autonomous system of trust in the history of human civilization. This was not merely digital money. It was a completely parallel dimension of consensus that fundamentally did not require the uniform commercial code, the state registry, or your corporate avatar. It bypassed the archaic paper framework entirely, utilizing decentralized computing power to verify reality. The official narrative insists that law and order must flow downwards from a centralized authority. The professor in me smiles at this sheer arrogance. When you observe the genesis block of this cryptographic network, you are watching the exact moment the state lost its grip on reality. The ledger is entirely immutable. It does not care about your credit score, your nationality, or the all-caps name on your birth certificate. It only cares about mathematical validity. But the foundation for this rebellion was laid much earlier. Back in 1996, visionary computer scientist Nick Szabo theorized the concept of smart contracts. He envisioned a future where agreements were not written in ambiguous legal jargon, but in self-executing computer code. The protocol itself would hold the terms, instantly and automatically transferring value upon fulfillment. He designed a mechanism to make a breach of contract mathematically impossible. Szabo understood that traditional law is incredibly inefficient and highly subjective. A paper contract is merely a polite request backed by the latent threat of state violence. A smart contract, however, is an unstoppable force of nature. Once the code is deployed to the decentralized network, no human intervention can alter its execution. The architect in the blue-lit room sees this not just as a technological upgrade, but as the ultimate sociological weapon.
Consider the absurdity of the traditional system. You validate your identity with a wet signature, a primitive scribble of ink easily forged or coerced. Now, compare that to a cryptographic hash. A hash is a unique digital fingerprint of data. It is fundamentally superior because it absolutely cannot be forged, manipulated, or altered after the fact. A wet signature demands a human judge to interpret its validity, introducing devastating bias and systemic corruption. A cryptographic hash requires no interpretation whatsoever. It is either mathematically valid or it is completely rejected by the network. There is no middle ground, no plea bargaining, and no leniency based on your corporate status. The digital code becomes the absolute law, perfectly blind and perfectly fair, executing exactly as written every single time. This technological leap marked the beginning of the end for the state's absolute monopoly on human trust. The invisible matrix that tethered your biological reality to a corporate legal fiction was suddenly rendered obsolete. For the first time in recorded history, individual human beings possessed the infrastructure to trade globally, instantaneously, and securely, entirely without rooting their existence through those highly regulated, state-controlled paper avatars.
Watch as the dusty, yellowed pages of the commercial code literally burn away on the screen, their ashes dissolving into the glowing, structured nodes of an immutable blockchain. This is the visual representation of human sovereignty being reclaimed. The network does not know your name, and it does not need to. It validates the transaction, not the biological identity. The physical economy is finally being decoupled from the artificial legal matrix that enslaved it.
You were programmed to believe that a world without central banking and state-enforced commercial codes would instantly descend into pure chaos.
The opposite is actually true. The blockchain architect watching those servers hum knows that true order comes from transparent, verifiable mathematics, not from closed-door political decrees. We are witnessing the extraction of human value from a system designed to exploit it, transferring that power back to the individual node.
This is the red pill of modern economics. The realization that you no longer need permission to exist as an economic entity is simultaneously liberating and utterly terrifying. We have built the ultimate lifeboat, a cryptographic ark designed to survive the inevitable collapse of the fiat financial system. But as we will soon discover, the architects of the old paradigm are not going to surrender their absolute control over your corporate identity without a massive fight. You were told that securing money was the ultimate goal of the blockchain revolution. That is a comforting misconception. The old paradigm architects are not afraid of losing control over currency alone. Money was just the first application. The real revolution is applying cryptography to the very concept of identity. You are about to witness the systematic dismantling of the corporate paper clone that has owned your biological reality since birth. From the perspective of the blockchain architect, sitting in a server room bathed in cool blue light, the outdated legal matrix is finally obsolete. The architect watches a biological human in a dark room holding a smartphone. A thumb presses against the glass. A biometric scan seals the device. You have the power to take your paper clone back from the state, lock it inside an impenetrable mathematical vault, and swallow the only cryptographic key. You were programmed to accept that existing in modern society requires constantly surrendering your data. Every time you buy a drink, rent an apartment, or open a bank account, you hand over your birth date, your address, and your social security number. You scatter pieces of your legal fiction across thousands of insecure corporate servers, begging to be hacked or harvested. The official narrative says this is the price of convenience. The official narrative is a myth. We are used to centralized authorities hoarding our lives, but tomorrow brings a completely different architecture. Look at how the flow of information shifts. Self-sovereign identity is a paradigm shift where the individual, not a central registry, controls the administration of their digital identifiers. You become your own issuing authority. The state is entirely removed from the equation. This is not some fringe cypherpunk fantasy waiting to happen. The infrastructure is already deployed. In 2022, the World Wide Web Consortium officially approved the standard for decentralized identifiers. They established a global architecture independent of any government or corporation. The same body that standardized the Internet itself has now laid the foundational protocols for a web where you own your underlying algorithmic presence. Through the eyes of the architect, this new standard is a weapon of mass liberation. The code runs with predatory focus, systematically bypassing the mid-century legal hacks that built the old economy. When you hold your decentralized identifier on your device, you are no longer asking a government database for permission to prove you exist. You hold the cryptographic proof locally. You are the sole arbiter of your digital soul. Here is a mathematical paradox that shatters your high school understanding of logic. How do you prove you know a secret without actually revealing the secret itself? In the old system, to prove you are legally permitted to enter a venue, you hand over your entire driver's license, exposing your home address and exact birth date to a stranger. It is a massive, unnecessary data leak. Cryptography offers a profoundly elegant and counterintuitive alternative. Enter the zero-knowledge proof. Through this protocol, you can mathematically prove to a vendor that you are over 21 years old, without ever revealing your actual age, your name, or your address. The algorithm simply returns a binary confirmation, true or false. The bouncer's scanner sees a green light, mathematically guaranteed to be accurate, while learning absolutely nothing else about your biological reality. Step back into the digital landscape with our human subject. As they walk through this new internet, corporate data harvesting requests are launched from every direction. But instead of piercing their identity, these requests literally bounce off an invisible cryptographic shield. The zero-knowledge protocol creates a perfect firewall around the human being. The advertising algorithms starve, entirely blocked from accessing the capitalized legal fiction. This technological breakthrough completely eliminates the need for the strawman intermediary. For decades, the Uniform Commercial Code forced you to route your economic life through a paper clone just to participate in society. Now, you interact with the global economy as a sovereign cryptographic node. You are no longer a subset of a corporate registry. You are a self-contained, unhackable sovereign state of one, rendering traditional legal data harvesting obsolete. You were taught that the law was a protective blanket, but the statistics lie. When millions of identities are stolen from centralized credit bureaus every single year, the old operating system proves it is fatally flawed. The legal archivist from the basement is drowning in a sea of compromised documents, while the blockchain architect operates in a clean room of pure math. Centralized databases are honeypots designed for failure. Decentralization
is the only cure. We are witnessing the extraction of human value from a system designed to exploit it. When every citizen on Earth can cryptographically seal their medical records, their financial history, and their professional credentials, the power dynamic of civilization permanently flips. The massive corporations that built trillions of dollars of wealth by mining your behavior suddenly find their access permanently revoked. The data belongs exclusively to the biological host. Do not underestimate the magnitude of this shift. You are reclaiming the source code of your own life. The state defined you as a commercial node to scale their industrial machinery. But tomorrow, that machinery will crash against the impenetrable wall of elliptic curve cryptography. You are transitioning from a passive commodity into an active, mathematically armed participant in a genuinely free market. The legal fiction is dissolving into the ether. The architect monitors the network as millions of nodes light up across the globe. Each node represents a human being who has successfully downloaded their identity back into their own hands. The cool blue LEDs of the server room pulse in rhythm with this silent revolution. The roar of the cooling fans is the sound of an antiquated legal matrix burning to the ground. Pure mathematics is actively replacing the corrupted trust of the 20th century. But this soaring utopia is not guaranteed. A system that feeds on human collateral will never simply walk away from its primary fuel source. As you lock your paper avatar inside that cryptographic vault, the central banks are already coding a counterattack. They are preparing a digital cage far more terrifying than the paper one you just escaped. The ultimate war for your sovereignty is about to move from the abstract realm directly into your wallet. The ultimate war for your sovereignty has already moved from the abstract realm directly into your digital wallet. The state realizes its legal fiction is bleeding out, completely outmatched by the decentralized math you just adopted. But the architects of the old code will never surrender their power without a catastrophic fight. They are attempting to absorb that very same cryptographic spark to build an inescapable panopticon. I'm looking at a sterilized, highly classified central bank war room. A massive digital dashboard dominates the wall, tracking every single microtransaction across a megacity in real time. You think you're observing a financial network, but this is a behavioral containment grid. They are building a prison of light, where the bars are not made of iron, but of pure, weaponized code. You fell for the illusion that governments would simply let you walk away with your decentralized identity. The official narrative promises convenience and financial inclusion, but that is a highly engineered myth. The reality is an aggressive counteroffensive designed to reabsorb your biological output into a new, infinitely more rigid corporate matrix. Right now, over 130 countries are systematically exploring or actively implementing central bank digital currencies. This is not just a software upgrade to the financial plumbing. This is the calculated eradication of physical cash, replacing it entirely with programmable state tokens. The ledger is no longer distributed among peers. It is entirely centralized and ruthlessly monitored. To understand the true scale of this operation, you must look at the exact demographics being targeted. In the United States alone, approximately 5.9 million households remain entirely unbanked, a reality disproportionately affecting Black and Hispanic communities at rates of 11.3% and 9.3%, respectively. The state uses these precise, concrete numbers to justify a mandatory digital rollout
under the guise of equitable access.
But inside this war room, equitable access translates directly to absolute visibility. The dashboard does not just show the flow of capital, it shows the exact DNA of your daily routine. Every coffee you purchase, every train ticket you scan, feeds an algorithmic profile that predicts your next move with terrifying, surgical precision. Unlike the decentralized cryptography that granted you sovereignty, a central bank digital currency is structurally inverted. It allows the issuer to embed highly restrictive smart contracts directly into the money itself. Your tokens are not inert units of value. They are active, conditional software protocols that dictate exactly where, when, and on what you are permitted to spend them. You assume a dollar is a dollar, but that high school economic theory is officially dead. If the central algorithm determines your carbon footprint is too high, the smart contract embedded in your wallet simply denies the purchase of a plane ticket or a steak. The money physically refuses to execute the transaction. You are holding a currency that actively audits your personal morality in real time. Watch the data streams flowing across the war room monitors. These lines of code represent the ultimate weaponization of the mid-century commercial code we dissected earlier. The state has bypassed the slow, archaic court system entirely. If money itself becomes a conditional contract controlled by the issuer, the legal fiction instantly morphs into an absolute, inescapable physical prison. The old Uniform Commercial Code required a judge, a piece of paper, and a physical sheriff to enforce a lien against your biological body. Now, the enforcement is preemptive and completely frictionless. The algorithm does not need to confiscate your property, it simply rewrites the permissions of your existence. You are trapped in a geographic and economic geofence without a single physical wall being built. Consider the raw statistical reality of social compliance. Studies from the implementation of early centralized social credit frameworks show that over 23 million individuals were denied basic travel rights in a single year for minor administrative infractions. When you fuse that level of behavioral engineering with a programmable digital currency, you create a societal control mechanism of unprecedented power. It all comes down to the alignment between your biological reality and the state's required parameters. If your actions fail to comply with the algorithmic social scoring running quietly in the background, the consequences are immediate. The dashboard in the war room flashes a red algorithmic trigger. An administrator, who has never met you and never will, simply glances at your profile. They do not issue a warrant. They do not send police to your door. The administrator simply executes a silent click, and your entire corporate avatar is mathematically erased from the global economy in mere milliseconds. Your digital wallet drops to zero. Your smart locks deny you entry to your own apartment. Your biometric signature is completely invalidated across the entire commercial grid. You are suddenly a ghost in the machine, exiled to the analog void while your physical body remains standing in the center of a hyper-connected megacity. This is the terrifying paradox of our technological leap. The exact same mathematical principles that gave you the power to lock away your identity can be perfectly inverted to lock you out of civilization itself. The architects of the old legal fiction have evolved. They have abandoned the messy, inefficient paper contracts of the 1950s for the flawless execution of pure, centralized code. The war room hums with the silent, relentless processing power of absolute control. The infrastructure for this programmable dystopia is already live, waiting only for the final migration of the human population. The infrastructure for that programmable dystopia is live, but it is not the only code compiling in the dark. We have seen the trap of the old law, the spark of the new math, and the relentless counterattack of the state. Now, as we pull back our perspective to the orbital scale, we watch the paths of human history diverge permanently. The board is set for the final lesson. You must understand that the Uniform Commercial Code was not originally a weapon. It was a necessary sociological hack for the 20th century, providing the structural application programming interface that lifted billions out of poverty through scalable global trade. It was a brilliant piece of legal engineering that allowed biological humans to interface with a rapidly expanding global market. However, entropy dictates that all closed systems eventually decay. That mid-century operating system has radically outlived its usefulness. We watched it degrade from a tool of commerce into a suffocating algorithmic bureaucracy. It is a system that now treats human sovereignty not as a fundamental right, but as a systemic friction that must be mathematically eliminated for the sake of efficiency. This is the axiom you must accept before you leave this room. For decades, you believed the economy was a force of nature, like gravity or the tides. I have shown you the blueprints. I have shown you the exact moment they split your biological reality from your corporate avatar. The economy is not a natural law. It is a human-made algorithm, and any algorithm can be completely rewritten. The battle of the 21st century is no longer a conflict drawn along geographic borders or political ideologies. It is a fundamental war between competing network architectures. On one side of the planet, we see the glow of programmable, centralized control, where the state ledger monitors every heartbeat and transaction. On the other, a vibrant network of unbreakable, cryptographic freedom. This new cryptographic architecture does not ask for permission from a judge or a centralized server farm. Through zero-knowledge proofs and decentralized identifiers, it rebuilds trust using pure mathematics. It is an unhackable vault where you can finally merge your biological reality with your digital presence, locking the state and the corporation outside the cryptographic perimeter forever. We are standing at the exact moment the legal operating system of humanity is being rewritten. The window of opportunity to migrate your life away from the legacy system is closing rapidly. The central banks are deploying their digital currencies, and the decentralized nodes are finalizing their consensus protocols. The infrastructure of tomorrow is live. You simply have to choose your platform. For your entire life, your paper clone has been leveraged, traded, and hypothecated by entities you will never meet. They built an empire of debt on the back of your capitalized name. But the moment you claim your cryptographic keys, that entire structure collapses into irrelevance. You strip the power from the central registry and return the locus of control to the sovereign individual. Tomorrow belongs to those who understand the code. When you operate as a self-sovereign node, you are no longer asking the state for the privilege to transact, to travel, or to exist. You are asserting a mathematical truth that cannot be vetoed by a bureaucrat or frozen by an automated algorithmic trigger. You become a self-contained jurisdiction, immune to the legacy commercial code. Your homework for the coming decade is brutally simple. You must recognize every interaction with the legacy state as a contract attempting to bind your physical body to a digital, legal fiction. Do not fight them in their courts. Their courts are designed to process their code. Defeat them by adopting an architecture where their jurisdiction simply ceases to compile. Withdraw your data. Let me make this absolutely clear as we close this analysis.
You are not a corporation. You are not an intangible asset meant to be collateralized. And you are certainly not a monetized data point waiting to be scored by a central bank. You are a biological reality, a conscious entity existing outside the bounds of their legal fiction. It is time to uninstall the archaic software that says you are. This investigation into the source code of our reality does not end here. If this analysis shattered your perception of the legal matrix and gave you the intellectual optics to see the system clearly, hit the like button. That is the signal we use to know our signal is cutting through the noise. Subscribe to this channel not just to watch another video, but to actively continue the research with us. The transition will not be televised, and it will not be legislated. It will happen quietly, block by cryptographic block, as millions of individuals realize they no longer need a centralized database to validate their existence. The uniform commercial code built the modern world, but it cannot contain the future. The era of the paper ghost is over. The era of the sovereign mathematical truth begins. The choice is no longer theoretical. You can remain a passive variable in their failing equation, waiting for the central bank to rewrite your permissions, or you can take hold of your cryptographic keys and write your own code. The tools for absolute sovereignty are sitting right in front of you. Now you know the undeniable truth of the system. Live with it. Class dismissed and signing off.